So let's talk about confidence. So I was able to visit all sorts of different places while I was reporting the book. I went to sports academies, I went to Juilliard, the music school. But probably the most interesting day I spent was at West Point, the US Military Academy. They have an entire department of psychologists that work with their athletes and their cadets. And one of the things they work really hard at is trying to find techniques to help them gain confidence before they perform, whether it's on the athletic field or in a military drill. The photo you're seeing here, they have these chairs. You can see it's sort of shaped like an egg. It's very comfortable inside. What makes this chair interesting is that there are speakers inside of it. And when the speakers are turned on and when the volume is turned up, it really isolates you and it's an immersive kind of experience. It really focuses you on what's coming through those speakers. And one of the things I saw them do in the psychology department at West Point is they create these custom scripted narratives for their athletes. So the guy that I watched was actually the goalie on the Army lacrosse team. His name was John Quinn. And so I watched John Quinn get into this chair, and then the music turned on. He closed his eyes. He had specially chosen motivational songs that upped his energy level. And then in the background, this narrator came on with his deep voice, and he was saying, John Quinn, you are the best lacrosse goalie in Division One athletics. Remember the game against Navy last year when you stopped 17 goals? It was a very specific and detailed recollection of this goalie's best moments, and it was constructed into about a 4-minute audio track. Now, he was instructed to listen to this before games on the bus. He was instructed to listen to this in the morning when he woke up, at night before he went to bed. The idea here is that before this goalie stepped onto the playing field, he wanted to vividly remember his best moments, because if you can get yourself in the frame of mind where you're focused on what you do best and the times you've done it best, it's going to increase your confidence and help increase the odds that you can do it again. So I think most of us are not goalies on the Army lacrosse team, but in our professional lives, we still have those highlight reels. We have those greatest hits, those greatest moments. Do is to try to isolate them and focus on them so that they can relive them a few months. They're going to do it again. So let me talk about my own career and how I've learned to do this. So the two moments that I try to focus on in terms of adding value are when I'm sitting down to write something, especially if it's something high stakes, and when I'm speaking in public or to the public, a setting like this. So one of the things I do before I sit down to write an article for Harvard Business Review is I go back and take 3 or 4 minutes and reread the best article I've ever written for the magazine. That helps me focus on the fact that I've been successful. It's very specific. It puts me in the mindset of, wow, this article was a home run. You're really good at this when everything comes together, and it helps me feel confident and it increases the odds I'm going to do it again. When I have to do public speaking or present an idea like this where I'm hoping to be kind of smooth and articulate, one of the things I do is I go back to a clip from when I was interviewed on NPR a while ago. NPR interviews, they edit their interviews down so that they sound so smooth and so concise and so put together. No matter how inarticulate you might be, if you're on this show, they edit you down and make you sound super smart. So before I do something like what we're doing today, I'll just take 3 minutes and go back and listen to that clip. It's one of my greatest hits. It puts me in the frame of mind that helps me feel confident and helps increase the chances I can do it again. So when I think about what everyday professionals can do to get psyched up and how to increase your confidence, the first thing I'd say is try to isolate your greatest hits and find a way that you can relive them in the moments before you perform. The second thing I want to think about is what exactly you do in terms of rituals, even superstitions before you take the stage. So this is Jerry Seinfeld, one of the people I interviewed while writing Psyched Up. Seinfeld, he still is, obviously he's very successful and a rich guy from the show, but he still spends many, many nights each year out in comedy clubs doing his stand-up routine. This is still a really important part of his performing life. And he's a guy he's a very exactly the same thing, and he does it the same way every time. And there's good reason for that. There's studies, especially in sports, across all kinds of sports. If you look at Olympic diving, if you look at people who do the same thing every time before they perform a routine action like that tend to perform it better. And people who don't have a pre performance routine, who are taught how to do one, their performance generally goes up. So there's a lot of evidence that shows that people do better if they handle this preparation time the same way every time. For Jerry Seinfeld, his pre performance ritual is very simple. He sits somewhere quiet, he reviews the outline of the jokes he's planning to tell on stage that night, and then at exactly 5 minutes before the curtain, his stage manager walks over to him with his jacket and he puts his jacket on. And putting his jacket on, it's a very simple action. It's not anything that would look bizarre or unusual if you were to watch him do it. But to him, he says that's the moment. It's signaling his body, hey, it's time to do our trick tonight. His energy level goes up. He gets into sort of his game face goes on. And then he spends the final few minutes walking around in a certain pattern before he goes out onto the stage. So Seinfeld's ritual is an example of something that's mostly internal. It's not something that's very showy or elaborate, and it's not something that's going to cause a lot of attention. And a lot of the most effective rituals are like that. They're things that happen mostly in your head and are pretty quiet. And if somebody were to watch you, they're not even going to know you were doing it. This is LeBron James before a Cavaliers game. James is an example of somebody who has much more elaborate and showy and complicated sets of rituals. Before a basketball game, he has a certain handshake that he does with every one of his teammates. He does hand signs that refer to the area code of the area in which he grew up in Ohio. And the most obvious of these rituals is, lots of basketball players before they play, they go over to this that if you put some chalk on your hands, you can reduce the moisture and it'll help you grip the ball a little bit better. But James does this as part of a very elaborate ritual. He throws the chalk dust in the air, the crowd gets into it. You'll see a zillion flash bulbs going off, because James is an example of somebody who wants to do it the same way every time, but it's much more showy and ritualistic and elaborate. And the point here is that, when it comes to getting psyched up, different people like to do it different ways. What works for you won't work for me. Some people need to have sort of, very elaborate, showy kinds of things. It's a very internal Seinfeldian kind of quiet ritual. The trick is to find what works before they perform. Aren't just about thoughts in their head or actions, moving their hands in certain ways. Some of them are about objects. And I actually reported a few years ago on research in Harvard Business Review that it involved a certain kind of golf club. This was an experiment done at a lab in Germany, and they took a whole bunch of golfers who were about the same ability, and they set up a test where they had to putt a ball on a putting green. Everybody was putting the same ball, the same club, the same distance. Everything was controlled. Everything was uniform. The only difference is they took the golfers and they separated them into two groups. They told one group nothing. They just handed them the golf club and said, hey, funny story. We just got this golf club. It was used by a professional golfer for the last year. So this used to be so-and-so's club. It turned out that the people who thought that they were using the professional's golf club putted about a third better than the rest of the people. So this is an example of how an object that has been used previously by a very high performer, that performance can kind of rub off even on people who use it subsequently. It sounds like a strange thing to happen, but the effect has been replicated in other settings. There's a study of people who were studying for a math exam. They did the same thing. They had a math study guide. Half the people were told nothing. Half the people were told, hey, the last people that studied with this, they got a perfect score. The people who thought that they were using the book that had been used by somebody who performed well on that test, they did better. So lucky objects can make a difference. If you think about your career, maybe it's some certain article of clothing or a certain article of jewelry or a certain pen you bring to your most important meetings. When you think about what might work for you, think about objects. So I tried to incorporate this myself when I was writing this book. I looked at this research about objects that have been used by high performers, and I said, how can I help harness that power and use it to make me a little bit better at my job? So one of my favorite writers is Malcolm Gladwell. Many of you probably have read some of his books, The Tipping Point, Blink, and Outliers. Obviously one of the most successful nonfiction writers in the world today. So I got in touch with Gladwell, and I told him I wanted to send him a computer keyboard, and I wanted him to type on that keyboard as his primary keyboard for 3 months and then I wanted him to send the computer back to me. And he agreed to do it. He's a good guy. So now I have a special keyboard. This is the keyboard that Gladwell used for 3 months. He shipped it back to me. It's the keyboard that I wrote today. It's kind of special, maybe even a little bit magic. Um, I used it to write this book. And when I have a hard assignment or something that's particularly high stakes or that I'm stressed out about, I reach into a drawer and I pull out the special keyboard and I use it. And so in your own work, if there's some object that's been used by a high performing person on your team or in your company, or maybe it's an artifact, try to seize this power of special objects that are meaningful. College students routinely do this. There's studies that show that a surprising number of college students have a lucky pen that they only use for exams. So the question is, why would this work? Why would this keyboard? This is just an ordinary keyboard. You can go to an Apple store and buy this exact same keyboard, except that Malcolm Gladwell hasn't used it. So what is it about this that makes it more powerful? What is it about throwing chalk dust in the air that makes LeBron James feel better before a game? Why does Seinfeld think that putting that jacket on is that key moment in his pre-performance ritual? Well, there's a few things about it. So number one, our bodies crave routine and ritual. Funerals, which are obviously you're worried about saying the wrong thing, you don't know what to do. Everybody tends to be tense at them. So we've developed all these rituals about what you do at a funeral so that you and your person and your body know what to do during them. We like, during moments of high stress and high anxiety, we like knowing what to do. LeBron James is going to be nervous before a championship game. So he's doing hand gestures. He's doing handshakes with his teammates. He's throwing chalk dust. That gives him something to do. It helps him know what he's supposed to do during this nervous time. The second thing is that it's either going to make your year or make you fall short of your quota. Chances are, if you don't have a routine, you're going to be sitting in the waiting room just worrying. You're going to worry about what happens if you don't do well. You're going to, be nervous that something might go wrong. Having a ritual distracts you from that nervousness. It gives you something to focus on, something that's going to be more productive, more constructive, more positive than what, the negative thoughts that might bubble up. So a lot of what these things do is they just give us something to believe in. I believe if I'm typing on the same keyboard that Gladwell used, I'm going to be a better writer. And if I think that and it makes me more confident, well, then I probably did write a little better that day. So I'd urge you to think about how you spend those final 10 minutes before you go into that make or break moment. Figure out what works for you. Is there some sort of ritual or routine, whether it's very quiet or whether it's very showy, or whether it's something that involves a physical object, a lucky tie or a lucky pair of shoes? These things will help you, and there's a lot of research that shows people who do the same thing before they perform do better.